It is my pleasure to introduce our today's guest. This is Lisbet Холtedalь, Professor Lisbet Холtedalь from Tromsø University in Norway. She's a visual anthropologist, and many of us would like to have so many interesting things in our creative biography, because I will only mention that her academic advisor was Pierre Bourdieu, and some of you know who's that. And she also collaborated with Jean Rouch and also was a member of Lévi-Strauss seminar. So her field work took place in Africa, and her field work took place in Africa for many consecutive years, and up to now she is actively working in visual anthropology, a social anthropologist and visual anthropologist. Today we will have a happy opportunity to watch her project from early 1990s about the Sultan's burden, and on Friday night in European University at St. Petersburg you are welcome to watch another two movies that come from Tromsø University. One work in progress by Lisbet, and another one by Björn Anston, who is also here, but I will introduce him on Friday night. So I will let the floor to you, Lisbet, so that you tell us a couple of words about this project.
Thank you so much. Yeah, thank you so much. I'm very happy to have this opportunity to be invited to meet you and to screen one of my works within visual anthropology. I will just tell you a little about the context and the ideas around this whole project, and a little about the film form. So when I shot this film, it was I had spent 10 years on and off going to Cameroon to do my fieldwork, and I was doing fieldwork in the city of Ngaoundere, which was the capital of the province of Andamaua. There's this colonial Andamaua which reaches into Nigeria, and there is this Andamaua province in the state of Cameroon. And the history up till my arrival in Andamaua is very characteristic of the Sahelian areas, with nomadic people, Islamization originating from Timbuktu in Mali, and nomadic people spreading out in jihad and conquering more or less violently in Cameroon, not violently in a physical way of, or in a physical meaning, more conquering from the point of view of violence, psychological violence. They came from Mali to northern Nigeria, and there were several empires. It's a long story, but in province of Andamaua that you are going to meet, where you are going now with me, the Sultan, he's the direct descendant of Usman Dan Fodio, who came from northern Nigeria in the mid-19th century, and actually all the local populations in the northernmost part of Cameroon were completely harassed psychologically through the political processes of establishing Fulani empires. So there were sultans and sultanates established progressively in the area, and they were put up political structures and power systems where the Fulanis, they had very smart strategies for incorporating local populations in hierarchy, where some of the populations were became what could be considered slaves, pure slaves, and there were other populations that became servants, and still other populations became helpers to keep the hierarchy and to protect these structures of different power among the local ethnic groups. A very complex system, and the Sultan, the political setup was so that theoretically the Sultan should marry the princess of the local chiefs in the villages, but as you will see in this film, the Sultan also received a lot of women who lived as concubines in the palace, and so formally, if you get a child with a woman you have married, he can be elected to be a new sultan. And if you get children with concubines, these children are not formally eligible for political power. But you will get some glimpses of these aspects. The most important thing is that until independence in Cameroon, where the French and English administrations withdrew, the local sultans had kept very much power because the colonizers, they collaborated very, very closely with these sultans in order to also be able to pull through their own political objectives in the region. And they kept their power, and it will also be told by this sultan here, during then colonial reign, which means not only political power supported by the colonial authorities, but they also were the leaders of the religious, the Muslim communities. So they had all the powers, the political powers and the religious powers. And it was very, very effective and strong. I told another day, just to illustrate what I'm saying, I worked with Cameroonian students for many years, and when we were going to shoot this film, and I was able to speak in Fulani with the Sultan and other people, I was so happy we should work like in team to go into the palace and discover and follow the people, the wives, the servants, and build up our kind of discovery of the life of a sultan in a new political context that was developing in the beginning of the 90s. After a couple of days, my students gave completely up to follow me into the palace because it's so strict rules about behavior. They had to take off their shoes, they couldn't go in unless they were on their knees. They had to crawl on their knees. If the Sultan was present in the different spaces, whether it was in the front veranda or it was inside the palace, and they got so nervous that they just couldn't work. And it taught me the lesson of the power. It's extremely strong. And there still is a sultan in Cameroon, a little north of Gaoundra, who's considered leading a state in the Cameroonian state. So just so that you know that he was extremely powerful, and he collected all the surplus from the harvest. He could decide everything. He could give orders to everybody and all layers, and it was a very frightening person for local populations, and also a lot of antagonisms, of course, that had developed within a century between local populations and this new political sultanate. So when I started my fieldwork, the political setup in the Cameroonian state was in a process of change. Paul Biya, who is president, still president as in most African states, is now the 4th years of reign, I think. So as most other presidents, they have tried to change the constitution to be able to keep on as political leaders. But there was this new, very important event. They had to establish multi-party system. And it was so confusing for this whole very conservative area with very low literate level, far away from the capital of Cameroon, Yaoundé. All these political things with multi-party structures, and the first election took place just in the middle of the shooting of my film. And in the process of preparations for these multi-party elections, you imagine a population where nobody knows what the party is. Nobody knows what it is. But they had to do it, of course, because the global process said that Cameroon couldn't interact with any external powers or collaborators unless they developed this multi-party system. So the Sultan, he was so eager because of this happening that he was negotiating with the new political representatives, and he even allied himself with one of them. He was so happy because he thought he had very good ideas, but he was put to prison. So in a period, not very long time before I actually started the shooting of this film, he had come out of prison because he had not found out how to be a political leader within a multi-party context. And so he didn't understand that if the Cameroonian state should continue to support him after independence, he could not somehow tell people what political party he liked. So he was having this problem that he had been showing off his political opinions, and then actually the same thing took place all over. He was progressively prohibited from taking resources from the local populations, and he had recently entered a position and relationship with the president where he got a normal salary. So he couldn't give his gifts to people, and he couldn't do as usual. So that's why the title is The Sultan's Burden. He was in a terrible dilemma between the past and the present. Yeah, so that was what I wanted to show. And when it comes to film form, my little remark here is that I have been working in the tradition of Europe and France with cinema direct and observational cinema. We had worked with David McDougall and Judith McDougall, and the students of Jean Rouge had been giving workshops to us in Tromsø in the 80s. But to get money to make a film in Africa, I needed contact with television, Danish and Norwegian television, and also we were lucky enough to get collaboration with BBC. And it was a fantastic event for me, and the process, I learned a lot. But it also taught me a lot of lessons about the power of the media, because it was very difficult for me to make my own decisions in the final editorial process, because BBC especially had their opinions about how this story should be presented to the audience. It was made by what was called the Under the Sun series that they had by then in BBC. So, and among other things, they insisted on having this voice-over that we were not actually aiming at when we made the film. But it's a very close Cameroonian professor of history who spoke the voice-over, and I had to write the voice-over and everything. So it's somehow a different film from what I made before and after, but that's another question. there were very violent conflicts between the Fulanis and the Boom, and very violent conflicts between the Fulani and the Baya. There are very many different ethnic groups, but the two most important ethnic groups in this area, they are the Bayas and the Boom. But actually the Boom never used violence, so I may rather say that it was not made by the Boom. And it's also, if you think and see, you think about what he told, his mother is a Boom, she was given as a gift. And that was the way the Fulani put up their power. They forced the Boom to be subordinate. And then the Boom became those who was controlling the slaves. So all the other peasant groups became slaves, and the Boom people who had the honor of giving their daughter to the Sultan in marriage, they were somehow a bit above. And they were completely between and betwixt. They were completely unable to defend themselves, and up to today has been a very, very traumatic situation for the Boom population, because they somehow were not really slaves, but they never got access to power. And as you also saw, these old ladies in the palace, they are Boom, and they have been together with the father of the Sultan, and as they said, they never got to know the Quran properly, but they had this kind of higher position but no power. And demographically, the Boom population, the fertility of the Boom population went very much down, and many Boom villages somehow died out even after this last century. There has been a very violent kind of assimilation going on. In the city of Gaundere, most people who wanted to be heard, who participate in the modern sectors of the life of the city, they all said that they were not Boom origin. So majority of the Boom people, when I came in 1980, they said that they were Fulanis. They had this very, very ambiguous position.
The buyers,
The buyers, they have had more open, aggressive, and they were also below the Boom. And they have been killing. And now what is going on, which is extremely terrible, right now in Central Africa, it's genocide. The Bayas and Fulani have been killing each other the last 3 years. It's absolutely terrible. But on the Central Republican side of the frontier. So the peasants in RCA, Central African Republic, are Bayas, and the Fulanis are moving around as nomads now in that area, and in the present political developments, the conflicts have grown and grown and grown, and daily killings, very violent, migration into Cameroon for people who flee to get away from the killings and so on. The relationship between the sultans in Nigeria and in Cameroon is still very, very complex and of great political importance. And I would say that the son of this sultan that you see in this film, he has acquired totally new forms of power. He's become an entrepreneur. So the religious power is somehow evaporated, but there are many forces in the society that contribute to his power still being a certain stronghold for local populations, especially the illiterate populations. If the present-day authorities, they want to control the political opinions and so on, they still have really to deal with the local heads. So it's going up and down, the powers, and what actually contributes to the power of these leaders is changing all the time.
Yeah, but I was on the other side of the border in Nigeria, in Yola,
Yeah.
and so it seemed to me that actually the situation there is a little bit different.
Yeah.
So still the power of Lamido is very effective. So it is felt in many spheres. Than we can see in Cameroon in this film.
Yeah, you can see it here. Yeah, you can see it.
So in Yola it was felt practically everywhere that still the Sultan Palace is the main building of the town, and the power of this person is felt at least.
Very much felt. Up to today, and if you want to understand Nigerian politics, you cannot avoid studying the importance of the sultanates. In the recent development in the up north. So, and the religious judge in this film, he studied the Quran for nearly 20 years in Yola before he came down to Gandhara and was appointed the judge by the Sultan.
But actually all the ethnographic things about this film are very similar to what I saw in Nigeria, in eastern Nigeria. And even the relationships between people speaking the languages from the Andamaua group, it is very curious that they are called Andamaua. Actually, this is just one of the Niger-Congo families, but the relationships are still the same. So it is a sort of subordinates and even the clans of some local people there in Andamaua state in Nigeria, they are called according to the places where they tried to hide from Fulbe. Some of them are called hiding in the mountains or in the forest and so on.
What Björn, my colleague, and our other colleague at our tiny little master program center in Tromsø, he is also working in northern Cameroon, and our colleague Trond Våge. And what is extremely important is that at the local level, these frontiers created by the colonial powers, they are being transformed into all kinds of imaginary things, because they still, the local life and the traditional power systems do not fit at all with the frontiers. You see what I mean? So in these Fulani-speaking areas, the traditional hierarchy is being reproduced. Even if they do transform the elements of power, they manage to reproduce the power. Yeah?
Thank you for showing us the movie. I want to know if, because we saw a lot of elements of, for example, Coca-Cola, fancy suits, telephones. Those people, were they ever exposed to cinema? And how you were perceived by them, and how did they let you get so close? I mean, showing the Sultan shape and everything. Did they even know what you were trying to do? Did they even comprehend, like, having a notion of what the cinema is and what is your research all about?
The main character of the film I'm going to present a bit of tomorrow, he built the first cinema in northern Cameroon in the 1980s. So in Gandhara there had been a cinema for 10 years at least when I shot this film. But television was not yet all over the place. So people knew about cinema. So it was a violent process of change taking place in the 90s. When it comes to me, I still am astonished how come I was so welcomed, and I think the fact that I learned the language. He constantly said to me that he grew up with missionaries and nobody spoke the language. And I have to add that the Norwegian missionaries, who were actually building up the Protestant missionary work in that area since 1924, they learned a lot of languages, but they worked with all these people who were in a position of slaves. So they didn't learn Fulani. And so he was so amazed that there was a white person coming in and trying to speak with him in his language, because all the missionaries, they spoke Bum and Baya and Di. So this is just an aspect. But what it is, he told himself that he was chosen among 100, I don't know, legal and illegal children of his father. But it's also come through from what he says that it was because he was such a charming person. He was very seductive, and you can see his face when he looks at me. I see it now, it's just like smiling. So he was very kind of, he liked women. And somehow, yeah, he did, and I like men. But anyway, there are all these aspects to it. Really, he wanted to be a modern man, and he did a lot of mistakes, and he was very severely punished. As I told you, he came out of prison. So he had young lovers in the outskirts of the city, and he didn't hide anything to me. And now I hear your colleague here talk about the Lamide of Yola, it's completely unthinkable. So he was avant-gardistic in many ways, and many people are still talking about how I managed to not only film his wives and his slaves and concubines, but even have his acceptance to screen it, because it's kind of the last wall in this Muslim society that the women should be hidden and not photographed. So, but what my explanation is not only, I'm making a bit fun of the gender relationship here, but it's of course a story in itself. But the most important thing is that he capitalized from having a white person sitting next to him and in the sofa. So he was sitting there and I was sitting there, you see. And nobody ever, except me, managed to sit like that. And I think that he also, I've written articles, but not in English, about these processes, because he was very fond of having a white. The missionaries were so skeptical to this traditional leader with all these slaves, you see. So it was, for him, it was fantastic to have a white person who showed acceptance and was full of fun and enthusiasm. And he actually managed, with Trond and Björn, my colleagues, we organized a visit. So he came to Norway to visit us in our villages in northernmost Norway. And afterwards he also visited the University of Oslo and he lectured. Yeah.
Did he visit alone or
no, we organized because we had a lot of students who did their field work, and he helped them get the research grant or what do you call it, research authorization. So there were some 10 historian students in all from other universities who did their field work there. And Björn and I and Trond, in that period, we were struggling to acquire acceptance for the visual in social anthropology. We were very conservative social anthropologists, but we struggled with the legitimation of the use of visual in our research and all that it implies. So we put up with the head of the research council a happening where we screened the film when the Sultan was there, and people were amazed, just asking him questions about politics, and he was explaining. And it really made a difference, I think. So it contributed to our getting funds for our master program. We got quite an important sum of money the following day, because this was in the middle with the bureaucrats and foreign authorities in Norway, with the university from the capital, and the Minister of Education, Higher Education. The people were there, and somehow raised the questions of it was an implicit questioning of traditional research. I think that the main character was sitting in Oslo and blaming Norwegian authorities for their foreign policy, and how come there is only 8 Cameroonians here. My father has received 200 missionaries through the last 60 years, and they had this kind of debate, you see? Yeah, so it was like that. It was a long answer, but...
200 Norwegian missionaries?
Yeah, when I was there were 130.
Oh my
missionaries, children included in the whole Andamaua, living in the villages with Baya D people, Chamba people. Yeah, the boom had thrown them out. That's a long story. So the boom never converted to.
I
Yeah?
have another question, and it's connected with this policy that he is always emphasizing, this gift exchange, when he takes a surplus. So how did the local population saw these changes that happened? All of a sudden, they're not providing them with gifts. What does it mean? I mean, did you get a chance to maybe, talk with them?
Yeah, as you see, even here, as my focus when I did the field work and the shooting here was the problems of the Sultan. And since he was so open-minded, and I think also the fact that he suffered and he felt we had a kind of very good relationship. He felt that I was supporting. Yeah, I didn't end, excuse me, I make a parenthesis. When he came back from Norway, it was a fantastic experience for him. It was a fantastic experience because the local population, when you have been abroad, it's interpreted as a magic journey. They don't know what you do in the white man's land, but the fact that he had been there. So he capitalized very much in that way. All the people in the palace complained when they didn't get more money, more clothes, more big feast where they got new horses and things. So they were very aggressive when I was there. And it generated a situation whenever I shot with my team, because I was very lucky here having a team of professional sound technician and camera people. They complained right into the camera, but the relationship, and that's the question of anthropological approach to research, it's a must for me not to expose individual actors or members of societies as wrong or bad or good or anything. So I had constantly to have the other point of view. And he profited, as you heard here, he was explaining when he was giving his speech about all the criticism. So somehow he became progressively and very quickly the director. The more I talked to all the people who were so aggressive about him, the more I informed him, and he also had all his servants or police people all around. They knew whatever I did. So he felt that he had the opportunity to convey about the difficulties of life as a sultan between political parties and authoritarian political regime and all these things, ethnic conflicts. Yeah, so they were aggressive, but they found out when he died, to answer, that's another way of answering, many people thought that this was the last sultan. They would never ever become, there would never ever be a traditional chief, you see, with all these political changes. And it was the opposite that happened, because the political processes were so that a lot of people started negotiating what would be the interest of having a new sultan. So a new kind of legitimation for a traditional chief emerged, and all the people who wanted to have power, they participated in this. But to conclude, after, I think it was 12 months they discussed before the new was selected. And the following day, when they finally agreed about one person, the most important ministers of the court of the former sultan, they were told by the president that he was going to select the one. So the one who's presently sultan, he was not selected by the local authorities, traditional authorities. Mm. Yeah. Yeah, it was interesting. Yeah.
Did the Sultan participate in the film production? So did he somehow, I don't know, somehow control you? Yes, or some give you some recommendation of what moments he would like you to present in your film.
No.
So it was your choice, only your choice, to represent his maybe the dances or something else.
I might. Now it's so many years since we did it, and I've had so many other experiences from filming that were so much more complicated. I'm talking about it tomorrow. But I really think that he was an exceptionally open man. And he also said that it was because he was open that he was elected, that he was seductive and open and more than normally open man. So I told him that I wanted to make a visual story about his problems. And so he didn't stop me. I talked to all his enemies and filmed all his enemies. As you see, they all criticized him. It's unthinkable today. Today it's unthinkable. I'm just amazed that I could do it, because they didn't even fear. And that may be because he had been to prison and he had lost a lot of power, and people didn't feel that scared. Those who were interviewed by me, the head of the Boom population, the head of the Fulani population, the Marabu who is speaking, he's a member of the court, he's a Wakiri, you know the Wakiri from the court in Yola. So, no, I nearly don't understand how it was possible, because I really didn't hide that I talked to all these people who were so skeptical about his position. Yeah.
So there were no restrictions and no recommendations?
Not that I can remember, actually. And so it's been a very exceptional story, because all the Cameroonian experts and intellectuals and historians like Mohamedou Eldridge was speaking the wow of the text I wrote here. He is the most important Cameroonian historian on North Norwegian history. When I met him, and he said that this is just incredible, because all these historians have been writing about all these Lamida and all these sultanates and the whole Sahelian area, but none of these historians ever saw inside of the palace. They didn't write about it, they didn't get access to the wives. If I didn't get more women or female slaves into that film, this is my fight with the BBC. Just to tell you, if I have been controlled by somebody, it was BBC.
Okay.
And so that was behind my wanting to be even more eager with my colleagues to create our visual program, because no more television. Somehow, too, it's a very much of a simplification, but it was so tough, because they were completely immoral from an anthropological point of view. They really wanted to make people laugh at the Sultan. So I feel that I was the one censuring in the editing processes. Was a marvelous editor, Pip Haywood. So, but the fights were actually about, it was a male perspective that should be, they were not that interested in women, or they thought that the general audience of the Under the Sun series, it would spoil the story if we saw more of the relationship with the women. But just the sequence with him talking to his wife is completely exceptional. I don't think ever anybody has been doing it. Yeah.
I enjoyed very much this scene when Sultan was at the inauguration of the new, I don't remember, mayor or some sort of official.
Yeah.
And it's very contrast image of people with suits and traditional ruler with his garments. And I wonder if he also tried to imitate these symbols of new system of power, this modern, maybe, I don't know. Do you understand what
I really understand what you mean. This is my passion as an anthropologist, with the visual as a field of knowledge. because you get access to these things, as I also think this is marvelous, because you can see it with your eyes, the violence that is mostly verbal and written and so on. It comes so clearly through here, because he's sitting in the corner when the governor is presented by the minister. So this whole change in power is visualized in an incredible way in that scene, I think. And even when the minister speaks, he say we have to get rid of all these old beliefs and blah blah blah, in front of the sorcerer of the Sultan who is dancing around. And the Sultan is seriously believing that he protects him. So we have everything in this scene. Yeah, so you can. But he actually he was so eager to become a modern man and profit from new opportunities, so he didn't stick in a sufficiently conservative way. So it was not only the president who put him to prison, but also the members of the court felt that they lost control of him, because he liked this big car, he liked ladies, and so on. So he was very much criticized also by the members of his court, because he used these new symbols. And the conservative members of his government were very aggressive about these things.
Didn't he use European dress?
Yeah,
In Norway.
Do you remember he was walking around in his big gown?
This traditional dress.
Yeah. Yeah, he did. Yeah.
It was winter time, but still.
but he did a lot of things that were very new and considered illegitimate. So he was somehow pushing the borders at the symbolic level, and that allows us to see.
He had a telephone.
Pardon?
Telephone.
Yeah.
But that was the time before mobile phones. Yes. He got a landline telephone.
Yeah. That was a landline telephone, but it's the car. But as you heard, he complained about not having his own car. But when he goes to...
It was government.
Yeah. So he calls the president to be capable of showing off this more modern way of being powerful. So they sent this Cadillac to the Sultan to go and fetch the minister, and he sat there for 8 hours. The most powerful man into a couple of years ago, you see, sits 8 hours in the airport on a mat, looking at an empty flight arrival path there. He couldn't move, he couldn't give any information to anybody that he was impatient or wanted to go back or to have anything to eat. He just sat there. But he came in the car.
I wonder, how did the Sultan perceive his visit to Norway? Did it impact him in a way that he, I don't know, changed something when he got back there?
Yeah, but I felt, and Björn can comment here because you were also there, it was a fantastic event because he, after 2 days, he said that I'm so disappointed. And that was what saved us. He was so disappointed because he asked everybody, where are my Cameroonian sons and daughters? My grandparents and my parents, they received all these Norwegians. So he thought that he would meet a lot of young people who had been going to Norway because of their close relationship with the missionaries. And he got very, very angry. And so he said to us every day, can it be possible 8 Cameroonians? And that was in 92. No, that was in 95 or 6, yeah. 8 Cameroonians, they said, with a permit to stay in Norway in that year. He was very aggressive, actually, and that aggression came out when the film had been screened, right in the face of the Norwegian authorities. And it was very complicated for the Norwegian authorities to deal with. But he does it in such a charming way. So he is a very seductive man, you see, so, but this irony and the fact that he has never been to school, that he can't read, but very eloquent and very good at establishing contact. So when he came back, he really profited. But I would never say that people understand what has happened in Norway, because it's impossible when you have not been there. But wherever I go in Granada up to this day, I meet people, they say, "Oh, thank you for taking the Sultan to Norway." Now it's so many years since he died, soon 20 years since he died. Everybody knows it, everybody says it up to today. So it has made a great impression locally. Actually, that's African politics.
We probably have time for the last question.
Yeah.
Well, thank you very much. Excellent. And well, I just wonder, what did he say after he saw the movie? How did he comment? Did he enjoy it? And what kind of elements of the film did he mention?
I can't remember the details, actually. I can maybe better, it's more easy for me to remember his wives, but I've kept contact with his wives, so, and they've been seeing it again and again, so I'm a bit, but I think I'm speaking the truth when I say that he was very happy with the whole story. He never said that we should have changed the way it was edited, or he didn't feel with his reading that he was offended. But there has been a lot of politics, but that's a totally different story. People try to make a lot of stories out of the fact that the women were visible in my film, and all the people who now introduce new practices in Islamic interpretations of the Quran. They try to use this film as an example of the wrongs and the wrong behavior of the Sultan before he died. So this is being worked and developed in all kinds of ways now. You see what I mean? But he was so happy. Yeah.
So, dear friends, let me express our common opinion about this wonderful ethnographic document, and to express our gratitude to Lisbeth that she's come and gave us an opportunity to see it. And I would like to announce that on Friday, 6 p.m. In European University at St. Petersburg, Gagarinskaya, Dom 3, we will have another opportunity to see the work in progress by Lisbeth and a movie by Bjorn about fishermen of Chad Lake. So
the fishermen and their relationship to all these new things up there. Yeah.
So you are welcome. Thank you.